Ray Lyric, Robbie Nicolosi, and Gary Berman Solo.
Nicolosi will be here.
Okay.
So this computer is not projecting to that, this one is.
You just have it.
I'll put it in the back of that one, maybe that'll work for that. Oh, never mind, I thought you were, so he's got to put.
Oh, it is. You gotta do this.
There you go, never mind.
Ta-da.
That way everybody doesn't read your email. After that happens
In court.
That's just embarrassing.
It was a good email.
I had impact.
I heard some really good.
Alrighty, with that, I'm gonna let, we're gonna run down to item number 1, or actually item number 2, presentation by, impact fee by Ann Westcott with Gleena Consulting. Brock, do you wanna give a quick synopsis?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Brock Cherry. I'm the city's community development director. I get to be over planning and zoning, economic development, and all the fun stuff that's happening in our city. One of my responsibilities is to also oversee the Impact Fee Advisory Board and impact fees in general. Impact fees is how growth pays for growth. It's a mechanism that we have for new developers bringing new development to make sure that we have monies for police, fire, streets, and parks. Those are the only 4 that we are able to charge them for. You're supposed to update these every 5 years. We are overdue, but we're doing it now, which is great. Also, we have a lot of growth that's happening. We have legislation at the State House that just passed that influences the way we do property taxes and all of those monies that we get from new development also. So there's no better time for us to do this, especially with the pending growth that we have coming to Mountain Home. I can tell you that we are at a record pace as far as our residential building permits, and we're going to see Mountain Home grow, and we want to make sure that we can pay for said growth. So that's why we have consulted with Mrs. Westcott so that she can do her analysis, and she's fantastic, and I'll let her brag about herself.
So I'd like to take roll for the rest of us who didn't get involved in all the last of that roll taking. I think it's just all the employees and me, right? That's all that's left. Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you. Mr. Chair, I believe, of P&Z, or just roll taker?
Just roll taker.
Mr. Roll Taker and Planning and Zoning. The advisory committee people who are already here, hopefully we'll get a couple more, and all of you other sorted people that have come in. We'll make this worth your while this evening. This will be the most fun you have all week, I promise. All right, yes, I have been hired by the city to update their impact fees. A lot has been changing, as Brock has said, in the legislature, not only on the property tax side, but also even how we do impact fees. There's some changes that we have to be aware of. You're not too far off. You're only a year off. And I think we all get a pass for the COVID year, right? So we're really just on time. Impact fees are based on a capital improvement plan, which is a list of the capital items that you need to build or buy in order to support new growth. We don't want growth to allow the level of service in your community to decline. So that's the whole purpose of impact fees. Many eons ago, cities would just develop a CIP and then ignore it for 20 years and just keep collecting impact fees. And it wasn't tied to anything realistically anymore. So legislature does require in Idaho that you have to update it at least every 5. And we're finding our really fast growing communities in Idaho are kind of bringing us back every 2 to 3 years, just to make sure, you know, lumber doubling in price, that can change your numbers, and just when we think we know where growth is going to go, it goes somewhere else. So this is just a good time for us to kind of get all of our ducks in a row. Next to second slide in, actually, third one, next one. Yep. So what are impact fees? This is going to make you as smart as I am, and you can all then take over for me doing impact fees. Impact fees are only paid by new development. So if I'm going to rebuild my house or add on a mother-in-law apartment, if I'm going to scrape my coffee shop and build another one that's the same size, I'm not going to pay an impact fee. Only people paying impact fees are people who are pulling building permits for new construction. So a new family home or multifamily, an apartment building, a new commercial structure. If I'm doubling the size of a commercial structure, I will only pay on the additional square feet. So it's just tying it to the amount of new demand that new space is requiring the city to support. Impact fees can only pay for capital infrastructure, not operating. So we can pay for a fire station and an engine, but we can't pay for the firefighters. The firefighters have to be paid for out of the general fund or the property tax revenues. And so one of my jobs is also to make sure that we don't build more capital than the city can afford to turn on the lights for. So my job throughout this process is to make sure that our operating budget can support this capital budget. Fees are calculated to cover what's called a proportionate share. There's kind of two legal cases that guide us in impact fees. I'm looking at the legal guys, one of them's totally not even paying attention. So,
He likes to fake you out, but he is.
You threw me when you called everybody sitting in the room sorted.
I hoped that it sounded like assorted, but you picked that up. Darn. Yes. So proportionality is, I can't just say everything that Mountain Home wants to build or buy in the next 10 years is because of growth and make development pay for that. I need to create some relationship or nexus between what we think is related to growth and why it is. So if you need to replace the roof on City Hall, that has nothing to do with growth. You just have a bad roof. It's time to replace it. If you need to replace an old fire engine, that's just an old fire engine that needs to be replaced. But if you need to build a new fire station because growth now has come into an area of your town that you can't get to within the right number of minutes, that's totally because of growth. And so I need to make that connection between what we're building or buying and whether or not it's for growth. And sometimes it might be partially because of growth and partially not. And so these are conversations that we have, that we'll have with the Impact Fee Advisory Committee. This is a critical role for you, is to kind of test all of my assumptions and make sure that it feels right to you as we go forward. So yes, we can't pay for operating expenses or to cure any deficiencies. So let's say you didn't like the response time that you have in your fire department right now for Mountain Home. I would say that is very sad, and I cannot do anything about that for you. What I can do is make sure it doesn't get worse. But you have a very good level of service in Mountain Home right now, so you're right on this, making sure that as growth we are able to keep things consistent. Any questions just about that big picture? Okay, then this next slide is legal process. The things you really just want to know, the most important one is the Impact Fee Advisory Committee. Most states don't require this. Idaho is unique in that it does, and I think it's a really great requirement because I'm much less interested in coming to City Council and presenting something that a group of people who are going to have to pay for the something have never heard of. That I don't like doing that to you all. I don't think it's fair to the development community or to the public. I think this is a nice time for us to talk about what is growth's impact on our community, what kind of facilities do we need, for everyone to be kind of vetting the data as we go forward, so that by the time we go through those final hearings with P&Z and with the City Council, everyone has already had an opportunity to give input into this process.
You're ready.
Capital. Doing a capital improvements plan. In some states, we could just figure out how much capital you already have and how much everyone owns of that capital and charge the next person that. In Idaho, we have to do a forward-looking or capital improvement plan focus, and that's also a great requirement. This is really in one night, two things I've said the legislature is brilliant at. I would like that to be noted. It does not always come out of my mouth in that way, so these were brilliant things. Because that gives us discipline. Each of the departments really has to stop and think, and I've already met with the departments and we made you think, didn't we? We said, all right, stop for a minute and really think about what you're going to need to build or buy and why and how much it's going to cost. So I think that's just good business planning for us. Then you'll see at the bottom, revenues need to be used between 8 years, 11 years in extraneous circumstances. But if this work is done properly, you're never going to get to a place where you haven't found something to spend the money on. We're supposed to do our work, you spend the money, things get built, it all works properly. And a lot of that is also relying on our Impact Fee Advisory Committee, which the acronym is DFAC. So if you hear me say that, I mean all of the people on the advisory committee. Really relying on the Impact Fee Advisory Committee to be kind of an oversight. The advisory opinion they're providing to the City Council is oversight on growth assumptions, on cost assumptions, on the nexus and connection. And also they're gonna keep eye out for, do we have any funds that need to be expended that we collected 8 years ago? You also have a rock star finance director here, and I have no worries about
And
things.
then just for the council, when she says the capital improvement plan, that's the one connected to the impact fees. So the department heads have a separate one that we use for our capital improvement, but this one's for impact fees. Does that make sense? You're gonna have two different ones.
And actually, I'll just piggyback on that. I generally try to merge mine into whatever the city's already using. So you have a CIP. I'm going to update some of those things in there for you that are growth related, and then I'm going to end up with a CIP that says, this is what we can pay for with impact fees, and the rest of this stuff needs to be paid for with general fund or other fees, and it will roll into your annual CIP budget update. So my goal is to make sure that you have as many things in one place and not a bunch of competing things. So yes, we will follow you and your format so that it's easily administered. All right, now let's go on to the next one. So I am unfortunately neither an economist nor a lawyer, so I have to kind of be wily in the things I do, and I just use logic. Logic is how I do this process. I want everyone in the community who's being asked to pay these fees or consider adopting these fees to just really understand, like a layperson, what it is we're doing and why. And the first 4 questions I ask are just to get us started in, who are we currently serving? How many houses are there already in your city? How many non-residential square feet? What is the service level that you provide? How fast does the fire department get to you? How many officers do we have on the street in the fire department? What is the congestion index in the street department? How many acres per 1,000 in the parks department? So we have an idea of how much we are giving to our current residents at this time. And then number 3 is what capital is required to provide that level of service. So to be able to respond to a fire in 4 minutes, for example, there's X number of stations and they're located where they're located. In order for parks to be able to give so many acres or so many recreational opportunities, they have a capital inventory, they own stuff. And so then number 4 is really me saying, if I take the total value of all the capital that the city already owns to provide this level of service in streets, police, parks, and fire, if I divided it by all of you who already live here, how much do you each own? And the only reason I do that, well, if I were in another state, like I said, that would be the end. That would be the impact fee. They won't let me do it that way, which is wise, but I do kind of keep a pin in this because I think it's interesting information. 2 reasons. 1, when I do calculate the impact fees, they should sort of be kind of in the same range. Your impact fees will almost always be lower than what the community has already paid in because they built in some scale there, some extra capacity. But number 2, when we ask people to pay an impact fee, we want to be able to show them that we're not asking them to pay any more than the residents have already paid in. So the first 4 questions are that pin that we'll hold on for a minute. And then the real impact fee study is for me saying who's coming. So I'm working with the city, we're looking at the census, we're looking at building permit history, we're looking at the plats, and we are asking those people who are on our impact fee advisory committee, what is your impression? Where do you see growth coming? That helps me figure out how many new households and non-residential square feet we can be anticipating. Then I say to the department directors, the chiefs, what are you going to need to build or buy to be able to keep your current level of service as your community grows? So if I had a community that was going to double in size over 10 years, it would make sense that they would not be able to just have 1 station, right? Probably another station was going to be necessary. If they were going to double in size, they were going to need to buy more parkland or more recreation space. If we were going to double in size, therefore doubling the trips that are generated on the roadways, we were probably going to need more lanes, for example. And after we come up with this CIP, or the impact fee CIP, and we determine which portion of it is growth related, because some of these projects might not be growth related, I take that total value of what we need to build or buy in order to keep your level of service constant, and we divide it by who's coming, and that is the impact fee. And now I've just exposed that this is actually a very easy business that I do. Next slide, please. Almost. Next slide. Yes!
There we go.
It is third grade math. Impact fees. It is not difficult at all. What you need to build or buy, divided by who's coming, is the impact fee. Let me stop there and see if there are any questions about how I go about this process.
Ms. Brown?
So,
And how do you factor in the time with this formula? So say we're gonna grow 5,000 in the next 3 years, how would that factor in?
So I'm taking a 10-year projection of growth. So I'm determining or guessing really how much you're going to grow over 10 years. And this is why it's so important for us to be updating frequently. We're gonna say this is what we think is coming. It's going to put this demand on us. We need to build or buy this in order to keep everything happy and the same as it is today. Does that answer the question?
More or less.
Are you talking about the value of the cost value over time?
That's what I'm thinking because we're in such an unpredictable market right now.
We will totally get to that. Can you
Okay.
hold that just for a moment? Okay. He does, let the record show, very smart question.
You put a pin in it.
Totally should, no, not even a pen. It's just a very smart question, and we're gonna lead up to that. I've got some dance to do before that. Now you did it. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, let's go through just a methodology of what the math looks like, what kind of, in the final report, and for you and the Impact Fee Advisory Committee, as I'm meeting with you, this is gonna be the kind of stuff that we talk through. It's going to be an example from Caldwell, I think, yes. Which of course is boring, but that's all I have. So let's look at what we did for Caldwell.
It like moves on here, but doesn't move there.
You have to whisper, okay, to be really gentle.
I'll double click it.
Okay, so here's just an example, and you have it in your packet that we, for Caldwell Fire, determined they had this much population. That meant they had almost 25,000 households and almost 7 million non-residential square feet. And through a variety of our data sources, we determined they were going to grow by another 35,000 people. They were gonna add another almost 12,000 homes. So obviously this is a quickly growing community, as we know all of southern Idaho is. And non-residential was going to add another 3 million non-residential square feet as well. This part here, this net increase in square feet, the only reason I do that is at the end of the process I need to take that total cost of what we need to build or buy and break it out by residential and non-residential, because we collect the fees differently. So that square feet is not of interest to me in any part of this process except for
A middle button's a light.
this is a lot of technology.
We have a pointer. Where's the pointer?
right there, she got it.
Ooh, this is fun. Okay, yes, see this right here, 89 and 11. That only becomes interesting later on, and it's just so that we can break out the cost, which usually leads to a question that I'm sure one of our esteemed colleagues here would have asked, probably you, since you're the smart one.
And, we wanna change consultants.
Okay, let the record reflect.
She was actually pointing at you, Mike.
Yeah, I was giving him a signal of don't raise your hand. That's fair. In some cases, we will actually determine the impact fee by different land uses. Streets, for example, we know that a single family home puts a different number of car trips on the road than a Starbucks, right? So I'm not gonna just lump them all together. I'm gonna specifically have what a single family, a multifamily, a retail office, and industrial use, because we have engineering data that will tell us that. On the fire side though, people say, well, won't square footage be important? Because if it's a bigger house, shouldn't they pay more in fire fees? My feeling generally is unless I have really good empirical data with which I will want to go to court with one of these two gentlemen, I don't like making fancy assumptions that I can't back up. So in most normal people communities, it doesn't matter how big your house is. Anyone in the house can call 911 and fire and police are just gonna respond, right? It's an address, doesn't matter how big. We also can't prove that a bigger house has more people in it. Often it has fewer people. Now this was turned upside down in Sun Valley yesterday when I met with them, and when they said, well, actually we have 15,000 square foot homes and they do actually take a much longer time to find the burglar. So I said, okay, well, you have data, let's use your data. I'm thinking probably not a big risk in this community. You can just keep things simple. Okay, next slide. All right, so this is that question where I said, we already know who we serve. In this situation, I said to the Caldwell Fire Chief, what do you own right now in order to provide your 4-minute response time? And the chief gave me a list, this is on page 8, a list of the three stations he had and a training facility, and then a bunch of big fancy shiny things, most of them colored red. And if you look at the bottom of this screen, where is this fancy middle thing? Yeah, ignore the very bottom piece because it's not as applicable at this point. But let's say they have $23 million worth of capital items, and that just means it lasts for at least 10 years. So they might have other stuff, but it's not depreciated on a capital scale. The loss is we have to use 10 years. So $23 million worth of stuff, and remember I told you I needed those square feet to break it out. In this community, 89% of it is residential, and 11 was non. I divided it by who already lived in Caldwell. And so everyone in Caldwell who was currently a taxpayer, had paid in $837 to the system to be able to have a 4-minute response. They bought all that stuff to guarantee that someone was gonna come in 4 minutes. Does that make sense? I'm trying to just kind of simplify it, but that is the takeaway. And non-residential, their share was 38 cents per square foot. So that was the pin I was talking about. Now I pin this up and we'll come back to it. And let's talk about what we really do for the impact fees. The next slide is then me saying to the chief, okay, we're adding 12,000 homes to your existing 24,000 homes, and we know they're not contiguous right around downtown Caldwell. They're out in Notice and Greenleaf and all over the place. What are you going to need to make sure you can still get there in 4 minutes? He says, I need 2 new fire stations. I need a 3-bay maintenance station, and I need to remodel my training facility. This is a good example of finding that proportionality of how much growth is responsible for. One of the questions we ask is, if you never issued another building permit, would you need this thing? And if the answer is no, then it's 100% growth. The only reason Caldwell needs 2 more stations is because they're growing. So those $5 million stations are going to roll into the impact fee. This 3-bay maintenance station, though, is something they've sort of, they're working out of a shed right now, and they have these lovely dreams of having a 3-bay maintenance station. But that's not totally growth's problem, right? If they already didn't have one, growth is not requiring them to have one. But 1 extra bay is being added because of the additional number of apparatus that they're going to buy. So that's where I got 20%, is I just took the square footage and I figured out that 1 bay was 1/5 of it, and I can do that much math. I got the 20% there. So 20% of this will be impact fee eligible, and the rest of it will come back to that council in their general fund budgetary planning. This training facility was just a bad training facility. They needed to remodel it. That has nothing to do with growth, so all of that ends up in the general fund column. Same thing when you get to apparatus. If you're building a new station, you're going to need to have some rolling stock in it, because stations without apparatus are sort of like sheds, right? They can't really respond by themselves. So we see that apparatus coming over to the right-hand side. Now, sometimes a lot of my Idaho communities are in places where they're starting to see vertical build that they might not have seen before, and that requires different kinds of apparatus. So the rule generally is if you don't have it right now, then it's not impact fee eligible because that's a deficiency. But if the only reason I needed a ladder truck was because now I'm having to respond to 3 stories or up, that's totally gross. That tipped me over to that. And that's where we see the aerial platform there. But then he's got $6 million worth of stuff he needs to replace. Is that gross problem?
Nope.
That's just ongoing business. So that becomes the city council's problem right there. So glad you're here to use as my foil. All right, so out of this, now you can see here at the bottom, this minus fund balance. Communities who have already been collecting impact fees have money in the bank. They may have a lot of money in the bank because they've been saving their impact fees for several years, or they may have just bought something and have nothing. But I need to account for the fact that people before have been paying in. So in this case, I will take this $23 million CIP or capital plan, I will reduce it by the amount of money that's sitting in the bank so that we don't double charge the people that came before and then charge for that item again. So we have a $21 million capital improvement plan. $11.2 million of that is growth related. Who pays for the other 10, 11 million? You look like you have the answer.
Everybody else.
There you go, everybody else, right. The good thing to think about though is that if growth were not paying for the 11.2, everybody else would be paying for the 23. So it is shifting the burden of some of the capital onto the specific users.
Councilman Bundy?
This might tie a little bit with Brad's. This one we're looking at kind of a historical, but if we're projecting into the future and growth doesn't match this scale, it would seem to me that's why you want every couple of years. So if we grow faster and I need 3 fire stations, you would just adjust because you're gonna collect more impact fees.
Perfect.
And if you grow slower, you adjust the other way because you're collecting less.
So they must organize you on the dais by intelligence at the end, right?
It's looks.
We have okay, I'm a little confused, but
No, you gotta remember, I was already here the first time.
whatever,
I
you
already
were. You already know
Ugly and
everything.
stupid, I just make sure.
I'm confused, just don't, we'll stop that part. 2 questions that are really relevant at this time, and we'll start with the cost of items. So, that's even an updated number of $5 million. 5 years ago, we were using $2 million for a station. Meridian just built a $9 million station. It doesn't matter whether you're a little community or a big community, it still takes a 10,000 square foot station, right? So little communities end up having higher impact fees because they might have really fast growth, but it's 20% of a smaller number than what a Meridian might be, for example. So this is where fire becomes we're completely obsolete lately in 18 months because lumber just doubled and now we can't build any of this for that price. I always use today's dollars when I do the impact fee because although I'm brilliant, I am not smart enough to figure out what inflation is going forward. What I prefer to do is have us all agree on today's dollars, and then I ask my clients to put in an inflationary index that's tied to the construction index, not just the CPI, and every year just automatically be catching up. It doesn't get you to a full catch up. You still need to do that full catch up, every 3 to 5 years, but at least it keeps us from being completely lost and having a $2 million station. So that's hopefully the answer to the question about how do we keep the costs up. The question about this is just based on my, prediction at one period of time, and everything could change tomorrow. If I do my job right, which I will, there will be a connection between every new house and its proportional share or its demand of a fire station, a park, etc. So if you just take off tomorrow and there's twice as much growth as even Mr. Cherry knew about, that's okay, because we've already figured out how much what the house's share of that station is. And you're just gonna keep collecting that money and you're gonna build the first 2 stations, and then every year, when the Impact Fee Advisory Committee looks at the financials, finance director will say, we took up in this much money, we spent this much. They will say, yeah, it looks like our growth projections are off. And they will say to the council, we think you should do an update now, even though it's early. And all we will do in updating is just add more stations on. It's not gonna change much, because while the numerator will go up, adding another 5 million for that third station, the denominator is also going up because we're projecting now more growth. So what happens when we do this, whether we're going forward or backward, more aggressive or less aggressive in growth, is the impact fee really doesn't change that much. If you get it done right the first time, the market should be able to go like this and you kind of adjust. At a certain point, 3 to 5 years, you gotta really adjust, because often there's just a change of strategy by that time. But we will not lose any money by having a low projection, because once we figure out that it's higher and sustainable, it's not just one of these that then will balance out in the third year, we'll update again, we'll put that station, we'll just keep moving forward. In the reverse, if something happened 2 years from now and there's just no construction whatsoever, you still want to take, the two people who build a house, you still want to take their $837, because they will need, one door in the new fire station at one point. We will just probably drop something off the CIP. So it all ends up adding up. Councilmember, did that answer your question?
Exactly, thank you.
All right, so here comes the math. You're the math dude. Are you ready?
Garbage in, garbage out.
No. That is no. This doesn't advance anything. This is a plan.
No,
You get
right.
to do that part. Right. We're gonna need to work on our act a little bit.
You pointed before, you like that now.
I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. All right, so with $11.2 million of the $23 million CIP that was growth related, break it out by the 89 and 11% residential versus non-residential. I divide it by the 11,000 houses and 3 million non-residential square feet. And what is interesting about these numbers?
They don't change much.
They are really close to my pinned numbers, right? This proves that I'm brilliant. It also proves that I can defend this in court. Two different things. So, it doesn't usually end up that close. It usually is, the impact fee is usually maybe several $100s less than what's already been paid in. But this tells me that I have established a reasonable relationship between those things, and that it is not unfair of the city to ask new development to pay an amount that is very close to what existing residents have paid. Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry, Councilman Brennan.
This example is Caldwell specific, right?
Correct.
And all these numbers that you've provided are just their examples of fire only?
Correct. So I could completely bore you, and we could do a streets and a parks and a police.
I just wanna make sure I'm understanding, like that $854 is.
It's just one fee.
Okay,
Right.
one of
You'll
them.
have 4 of these. So I'll do the same thing for all 4 of your categories, and then we will show what the total amount is per residential and per non-residential, and actually those then will be broken out further depending on what your streets fee is, based on your trip generation.
Second question, you might get to this later, but, the impact fees for each of these, I'll just call them departments, can they be combined for a joint project?
Yes. So if the fire and police chief said we are gonna co-locate a fire station and a little bit of a police office in there too, I just take the total cost and I portion it out into each one of those fees. And she keeps them in 4 different buckets that are separate from your general fund. And when it's time to build or buy that thing, she pulls the right amount out of each bucket, journal entries it over to your operating budget, writes the check, thing gets built. Yes. So a lot of this is this process that we're doing. We came and met with staff a couple weeks ago, and they've been doing a great job of giving us, I have to say, you have far better records than most clients that I have. They know stuff. Thank you, Steph. That's fabulous. Specific shout out to Darcy, who knows more about parks than I think I ever have known a park person to know. So that is awesome. I actually had to say I cannot talk to you anymore, Darcy. I have to move on to other people. we are developing these stories for each of these departments is to get an idea of what, so, you know, so they kind of start this conversation in a narrative, and then our job is to start getting that into numbers, so that then when we come back to the Impact Fee Advisory Committee, you'll see a boring CIP, but it will tell a story about what the fire or the police department or streets or parks needs, and we'll have a conversation with them about why and see whether or not you have questions or concerns about that. And then when we get to a point of a draft, we'll check back with the council to see how's this feeling to you. The Impact Fee Advisory Committee will have given you their opinion or advice as to whether you should adopt them or not. And then once you are comfortable with them, you go through the hearing process. Let's see, what else did I have here?
There's one more slide.
Just the process, yes, and so that's, we are, I would say, a third of the way through, just in that we've met with your staff. My partner, who has a pinched nerve and could not come with me today, I think he was probably faking it. He is watching right now, so I know you're faking it. We are, you know, we're down to the fourth bullet, developing these preliminary CAPs. And as soon as you're all getting emails from Ozzy now that are saying, let's, you know, question this. Once we get those, then we'll have a preliminary calculation, and I have to first say, does that seem right? Let's fix any problems. We'll run it by staff, and then that's where the Impact Fee Advisory Committee will come in on their next meeting, probably a month from now, where we will have all of this information I showed you for Caldwell, but specific to Mountain Home, and for each of the 4 departments, so police, fire, streets, and parks. And then we will have conversations with the advisory committee until you feel like you have the information you need to make a recommendation to council. We'll have a final report. We'll work with the attorneys to make sure that everything is the way that you want it. And then you go back to P&Z for an amendment to your comp plan, and then to council for adoption. One wrinkle is that I've been diligent in the last couple of years of noticing where there are fire districts that circle a municipal department. If a municipal department is providing service to the fire district via contract, as we have here, why are the people in the unincorporated county not paying their share? Unless your contract very diligently recovers the capital cost, and our experience always sort of is, it's a, well, I might see them at the Safeway and ask them if they can pay for half an engine kind of thing. It's okay if you plan that way, it's fine. But it might be, you know, easier to be a little more exact about it. For the last couple of years, we've been pulling our fire districts. We're doing this with Twin right now, so that we will do the fire fees, with your permission, as one service. So we'll count all the people in the fire district and the fire department as who's being served. We'll count all of the capital, most of which the city already owns. The fire district might own a couple of pieces. We'll project what's going to be needed to serve growth in those 2 areas and divide it by those people. Everyone then, whether I pull my permit through Elmore County or through the city, I will pay the same $837 or whatever number your number is. Then it, you know, is a little complicated with they account for their dollars, you account for your dollars, but at the end of the day, all the dollars come together, and the city is not subsidizing people in the unincorporated area. Unless you want to, because you can. It's up to you. If you don't want to, we have a way to take care of it. That's it. That's what I've got for you. How about questions?
I have a question. Dealing with, it looks to me like the real fly in the ointment here is bullet point 3. Because if that one is off, the other things you can calculate pretty
You're
easy
right.
from history and all that. But if bullet point 3 is off, you can be way off in either direction.
You're totally right. And there is no perfect. I am old enough to remember Johnny Carson doing, is it Carmack? Yeah. I clearly do not have that skill set, but we do have the census as our first place. We know we have a pretty generous, you know, recent count of when it comes out. Has anyone seen them yet? Okay, when it comes out, we have this number, but that's just a place that I start. And then I will just I'll just base on what their last 10 years trend was, which is not going to be relevant to most of my Idaho communities, because we didn't start seeing it until after the crash. So then I will just say, well, we know that is wrong. So then I'll go pull all the building permit history, which has already been given to me, and we'll say, what really happened in Mountain Home over the last 5 to 10 years? What really was that? Oh, it's not 2%, maybe it was 5%. Okay, let me turn to 5%. Then I'm gonna go back to community economic development. I'm going to say, what have you got? What's been platted? What have you heard about? What's going on? We go back to the advisory group who has builders, developers, people in the know on it who will say, oh, yeah, Joe is planning to build a, 1,200 house subdivision, haven't you heard? And then I start adding those things on. So then I sort of have a scenario from lowest to greatest, and then all of you in the community decide what you feel is the best number to go with. I give you hard data, you decide what you think the market will bear, how long you think there will be demand, and we will be wrong after all of that, which is why every year we check. We'll do a quick check every year, and at least by the 5th year, we have to do all of this again. Most of my clients in Idaho right now are, I hate to have us go through the whole public hearing process and pay for the whole thing every year if we don't need to. So what I've kind of been doing is a quick and dirty back of napkin. Let me just look at the updated building permits. Let me just look at the costs. And if the numbers changed at the same rate, we're okay for a while. But if you're not okay and you're losing money, then we'll do a formal update when it's in the city's interest to do so. Unless you want to be the growth guru and be responsible for the numbers. How about that?
Oh, that's wonderful.
Okay. Right.
Everybody should have a benevolent
We
dictator.
do. No, I'm the benevolent dictator. You're the growth guru. That's different. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay. Anybody else?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Stokes?
Yeah, I was doing some quick math, and I noticed for residential, you have an average of, or use 2,000 square foot for your units.
And that's old.
Okay.
Because people are, I probably should just get to know, the Corey Barton's, just stick, with them on what they're building. Every community is different. I will ask your community what the permits are.
Okay, and then I was wondering how the Impact Advisory Council or Committee and the council justifies, say there's a single airman, right? He buys a 1,500 square foot house on a small PUD lot. It's maybe 3,500 square foot. And then across town, there's a family of 8 in a 4,000 square foot house on a 10,000 foot land.
How
are
do you
we,
make that equitable?
Yeah, how do we say that
Okay.
in the correct way?
So for police and fire, unless the city has some empirical data that shows that the single airman is going to call 911 less times than the family of 8, most police and fire departments do not have that level of data to be able to tell me. It would stand to reason that 8 people would have more issues, right? But, maybe the single person has more issues at this point in their life. We don't know. So since we don't know, I just consider them the same.
They need to respond to both of them.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a readiness to respond. Parks, really good question. So that's why in some communities they'll say, well, little apartments that just have one person, they're not going to use a park because a lot of the apartment complexes now have their own pocket parks or trails or whatever. So we should have a parks fee be less for under 1,000 square feet, for example, and more for bigger houses because they probably have kids and they're using the parks. But someone could actually tell me that's not true because the family that lives in the apartment building may actually have a lot of children and may really rely on Mountain Homes Park System as a recreational and socio environmental, community building. So there again, I defer to you to say we know this about our community and we want you to differentiate this in this way. Streets, we totally know that the airmen, well, how many cars I don't know, how many cars can the airman drive at one time? It's hard to see. In the family of 8, there's still probably only 2 people driving, so,
10. 10 is a reason.
10 is the answer.
Yeah.
The answer to your question is,
9.
I can differentiate as much as you want. Most often we go through this exercise and then decide not to do it because it's good to be able to show our public, yes, we've thought through this. This was a really relevant question, and in that specific case it made sense, but among 100 cases it might not. The antidote to that is that the law is very specific about allowing any permit applicant to ask for an individualized assessment. So sometimes I'll get like a senior living facility that says we should not have to pay a parks fee. Our people can't walk, and we have, you know, a little garden in the middle. That makes sense to me. So there are times where I will advise my client to either half the parks fee or not have the parks fee. People really don't ask for individualized assessments very much, probably because they know they can, and so there's the transparency and then kind of maybe some confidence in the system, but all of our one-offs can always be dealt with in an individualized capacity. Often, for example, in Nampa, we're getting a lot of RV storage, and RV storage does not think that they are the same as any other kind of storage, or mobile home parks do not think they're the same as any other multifamily, and so they pay for an engineer to do a study of the actual trip generation, and then we adjust. I mean, you can bring me the data, absolutely we can do that. So yeah, we can address all of your one-offs in a legally appropriate way.
I had one follow-up. What about properties that might be annexed into the city? Is that categorized as new growth?
Yes. Well, no, if it's already built, no. Because, yeah, that's why annexation is just, you know, a hard question. You want to annex bare land and have them pull the permits while they're in your city.
Okay.
There's not as much, from an impact fee perspective, annexing already built environment it's not in your interest from an impact fee perspective. You've already lost that money essentially, because they're already built. There's no place at which they can ask you. Actually, you can in the annexation agreement. I mean, if someone really wants to annex into your city, you can say, great, and here's our impact fee, and y'all can pay your share. It's just, yeah. So yes, you can do that. If you're trying to annex people against their will, probably not.
I just want to be equitable for everything.
And that's really good, because when you have, you know, the county abutting right up to your city, and you're not technically responsible for providing them services, but they're driving on your roads, using your parks, having accidents in your city, they are using your services, and there are some ways to catch that up.
And really quick, do you consider golf courses, parks?
It depends on whether you run them as an enterprise fund or as a general fund.
Run it as general.
Then it's a park.
We run it as enterprise, but do transfer.
Well, it's subsidized by general fund, let me rephrase it.
You know, I think we'll just talk about the degree to which it is. So if I know that golf is, if golf in your city was a fee-funded activity, then we wouldn't ask growth to pay for it as well. But if golf in your community is a recreational opportunity that may be, you know, somewhat addressed through greens fees, or sometimes it's you're subsidizing junior golf, for example, as a recreation, there's a way for us to use a percentage. We'll just need to talk about the specifics.
We're both right, it is fee generated, but then we have to subsidize, I'd say, the labor, right?
It's just the labor, the rest of it pays for it's operational.
Yeah, I'll just say I need to just look at it and see.
Okay.
The rule is don't double dip.
Correct.
Yeah.
Councilman Brandon.
Ma'am, you're using the word recreation. Is in impact fees, is recreation synonymous with parks?
The
Because
statute says parks and recreation.
Okay.
Do you have a rec district here?
Not,
Yes and no.
A parks
That's a
dis-
good question.
As a separate taxing district, a parks district could, like a fire district, do impact fees, but according to the law, the eligible category is parks and recreation. And I interpret that in my non-legal but very upstanding opinion to also mean pathways and things that you might do for connectivity, so. It doesn't need to be a 25-acre irrigated green space with a slide. It needs to be open space, it needs to be providing recreational, activity, yeah.
But they're already getting funds from the people. So
The
we
rec
need to-
district.
Yes.
Right, so I wouldn't want to put anything on your inventory that belonged to them, and I wouldn't wanna pay for anything on your CIP that was going to go to them. If they want part of this party, they have to pay entrance at the door, yep.
I think, I'm gonna piggyback on Councilman Brennan, we have a Parks and Rec department.
Right.
So recreation for us is levied. We're saying like if recreation wanted to do something else that has a 10-year lifespan, you know what I mean? That could be allocated to these Parks and Rec impact fees.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Not-
I don't think the law cares what your org chart looks like. Again, I'm speaking for you. I think the law is looking at what the service is, and parks and recreation is an eligible activity.
Perfect.
So, anything that's
Capital
green
improvement.
or has kids and balls associated, those are all those count.
Facilities, they could do a facility.
A pool, your rec facility, pathways, fields, anything that's just a normal park or recreation.
Recreate when you enter the park.
Does recreation have to be a physical activity? Can it be a classroom? Cause you guys do classroom type stuff
No,
where.
that's rec, that's fine, yeah.
You gave the example of like a police fire combination, and I'm thinking, well, let's throw a classroom in there too and get all three of these people paying for it.
No, and that happens, totally happens. I mean, a city that's really thinking, I mean, that's a pretty prudent way to build a facility, right? Utilize it from early in the morning to at night, have the training facility for fire become a community meeting, you know, yeah, all those things. They just have to tell me the story, and I have to just figure out which portion goes to whom.
Does anybody have any other comments or questions for Ann? Councilman?
I'd just like to thank Ann for coming again, that I've seen this before, and I love the way she gives her presentations, and she's great to work with, she'll do us great.
I'll pay you afterwards.
Oh, okay.
Mayor?
Councilman Stokes.
Ann, what's the entire timeline for this? So when might we see it?
So your staff is working so fast, and I know that, we've kind of agreed to fast track this one because you have some stuff coming. I'm unfortunately agreeing for a lot of people that now, so I have to remember that you're first in line.
As long as you remember that.
I do remember, you're first, you came first. So this is the end of June, and we're planning to see I would say that we would have a draft in 2 weeks for staff to look at. We'll be able to schedule that advisory committee, and so now that you're all brilliant on what it is, we'll get right into the math and we'll look at the capital. So by the end of July, then I'd have an update if there were a lot of changes. I think we can brief the council in August, and then it's just as, you know, if you decide to change all your minds, that takes more time, but if you're still going, then it's a noticed hearing at P and Z, a noticed hearing at council, and then they're effective 30 days after.
And last question,
You
is
said the last question was the last.
is your mathematical formula proprietary, or are we allowed to see the process, the entire process?
You just saw it, it's on the screen.
That is the whole process.
That
right
is
there.
the process.
It's in the statute.
Yeah,
Statute.
I just, you know, I have to say my own kids have told me I am unable to monetize my own business, so it's just out there. Let's just do good things for the
I
world.
just didn't wanna make sure it was proprietary.
Well, it's in a public meeting.
Yeah.
You just sell it to anyone you want.
He will.
No, it needs, you know, this should not be rocket science. It should be intuitive. Everyone should understand this so that, it's a lot easier than how our property taxes are assessed, so, yeah. now, yes.
Good.
I promise just 20 seconds.
Ready, go.
Okay, I'm going fast. So when I learned about the current status of our impact fees, you can ask the mayor and you can ask Paula, I was very concerned. And the first person I called was Ann, because with the pending growth that I believe that is going to come, if we do not have this in place, I think it would be extremely detrimental to our level of service. And I know that we need to be prudent and we need to take our time and look at things, and I want you to know, even though we're fast tracking it, doesn't mean that we aren't being thorough and thinking things through. But it's important to me that if any of you have any confusions or any questions, that you can contact me, you can contact Ann directly,
Yeah,
that's why we're paying her.
absolutely, yeah.
So that we can get through the process in a pretty effective manner, because I believe our current impact fee where it is at does not reflect our future need. And the sooner that we update it and make it something much more than it's going to be, and I'm very honest with all of the developers, I'm like, it's probably not going to be that. It might be double or triple what that is.
And by fast tracking, I'm sorry, I should just say, I did not mean we're making the process quicker. I mean, I am expecting you all to hold meetings and not take 3 months in between your meetings. Actually, I'm just making you fast track, really, we're doing our normal things.
What Brock is saying is actually worse than that, because as you bring in new growth without having an impact fee, you actually dilute your current level of service. So your level of service is actually, you just lowered it. You just lowered it. And so
then I
now
have
you
to
can
start
only
at that
use,
place.
Residential.
you can only use impact fees to bring it new growth to your current level of service. But you've been diluting your current level of service, for how, for how long? So it
Several
actually,
years now.
it's actually worse, the longer you wait.
But we'll get you back up to where you need to be, and then you'll be fine.
Thanks, Sam.
Mayor, I'm sorry.
Councilman Brennan?
That makes me wonder, since we can't predict, I mean, we can predict, we don't know the exact numbers of future growth. Do we budget for a new fire station with general funds and pay it back with that? Because what happens if we plan for these impact fees and they don't show up?
That's an excellent question. I mean, obviously, you would not sign a bill to build, design construction for something that, and you're not actually seeing the growth. So we wanna keep watching these things, but, you can wait for, 5 years to get the $5 million to build the first station. You can loan the impact fee fund, general fund dollars, buy it up front, and the impact fees will pay the general fund back. You can bond for the project and make it clear and transparent to the public that the impact fee revenue is pledged against a proportion, whatever proportion it is, of the debt service. So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense in a lot of situations for you to take advantage of the already crappy market now and not let it get worse. Clients that I have that really have to save money until the 8th year, and that may not always be the best way. So if you have a more prudent way to do it, or, a lot of fire agencies are leasing to own their apparatus right now. It's still eligible, we just, we wanna make sure that everything's transparent and properly done, but it doesn't seem to stop us from making good decisions about budgeting. But yes, if you have $5 million sitting in your fund balance and nothing to do with it, you might wanna build a station.
So with the lease to own, that you can't pay with impact fees to pay for your lease to own,
If
can
you're
you?
gonna own it, not if you're just gonna lease it and give it back, you have to have something at the end of the day. So that to me it is a funding mechanism, it is not, a way to get around it, it's just, you're just paying
Same
payments, right? And the law doesn't actually really speak to it, so that's my interpretation, and I did not go to law school, so. But I know people who did, and no one stopped me yet, it's been 20 years, so.
And they're not saying a whole lot.
Nobody has said anything, so. He's got Bitcoin going on over there, so.
I'm reading your reviews.
Alright, Councilman, you got anything else?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Alrighty, I just wanna thank the executive leadership team for getting everything Ann needs. You guys been on point, spot on, and it doesn't go unnoticed, I appreciate it. to P and Z committee that's here tonight, I appreciate you taking your time. I know you guys could be anywhere else, but I really appreciate you guys making your time to come and understand why we're going this direction. And to the impact fee committee, you guys got your homework to do. We appreciate you doing what you're doing to get Mountain Home where it needs to be. And rural fire, thank you guys. As you saw, next year if we win something big too at the AIC conference, that was pretty huge for the rural fire and fire department. As you guys saw, next year we want to reserve a few tables if we win something else cool again and have a bigger showing. It was a showing of 5. Paula, Daniel, and poor Tiff.
We were loud though.
We were loud, but the city of Ammon was like, you know,
Yeah.
so it was neat. And that's the collaborative effort that we need to keep doing. So appreciate you guys. Hearing that, I will close city council meeting down, and then you could do your portion, Rich.
Yeah, sure. So, P and Z, closed, you good? Alright. Roll bar, proposed.
All right.
Impact fee advisory board.
And all the